Tantor Audio, a division of Recorded Books, presents The Highlander's Untamed Tempest by Heather McCollum, narrated by Timothy Campbell. Chapter 1. Isle of Mull, Scotland, 31st October 1550. "'Tis Samhain," Eagan Macquarie's brother Drosten said. "Perhaps you can find the headless Lady Gwyn to marry." Shrouded in white, the ghost was said to roam the moors on the night of Samhain with her black pig. Eagan frowned down into his mug of honey mead. The lowering sun cast his shadow across the wooden table set in the meadow above Aros Castle, as they celebrated with the MacLean clan on the Isle of Mull. The familiar discussion about who Eagan should wed began once again, making his stomach twist and his mood blacken. "I'm leaving in the morning." The thought sat on his tongue, ready to stop all the nagging. But if he voiced his plans, the night would erupt into another turmoil as his family ordered him to stay. And he was resolute. "I still say that Anna's sister Kat is bonny and old enough to wed now," Callum, Drosten's twin, said. He clamped his meaty paw down on Egan's shoulder and moved it back and forth without Egan resisting. "She's 20. Lark, Egan's sister by marriage, tapped her fingernail on the rough table. "Meg MacLean would be the perfect addition to our clan." Her husband, Adam, who was the oldest of the 5 brothers and the Macquarie chief, took Lark's hand and kissed it before saying, "Tor will not allow his daughter to wed a Macquarie, at least not until the curse is truly broken." "Meg marrying Egan will break the curse," Drosten said, lifting his tankard in salute. Beck, the second oldest, snorted. "Meg and Egan are practically brother and sister anyway. No bairns would come from that union." His family threw names of potential brides about Egan as if he weren't there, as if he had no say in the matter, a political bride locked away from any decisions regarding her life. Eliza, Beck's pirate wife, sat with her 2-year-old son on her knee. "If he weds Cecilia MacLean, he'll have an instant family." Her knee rose up and down, making Richard giggle, his blonde curls dancing about his cherubic face. Egan frowned at Eliza, and she grinned back. His ire was licking up inside him like a fire gathering strength. "'Twas good it was Samhain, or he'd leave that minute." His bag was already packed and sitting in Guyland Castle. "Cecilia's bairn will be a bastard," Rabbi MacDougall, their father's old friend, mumbled. "Not Egan's bastard," Adam was quick to add, "so it isn't a matter." He pulled Lark toward him and squeezed her. "Tor's niece is coming over from Barra Isle with Mary and Alec McNeil this week," Beck said. "I'm talking with Alec about shipping routes, and Egan can talk to him about his sweet daughter Brenna." Bang! Egan's tight fist hit the table, making all the wooden bowls jump. Some of the spiced nuts and sweet treats bounced out of them, scattering along the wooden planks in a chaotic mix. Egan stood to his full height. "I'm not marrying anyone." "You must," Rabbi said, his fuzzy grey eyebrows pinching as if they were 2 caterpillars trying to kiss. "To break the curse." "The willow tree is full of bright leaves and Wolf Isle is being repopulated," Egan said. Adam crossed his arms over his chest. "Unnaturally green leaves in autumn." The willow tree that sat in the bailey before Guyland Castle on their isle represented the curse brought down on William Macquarie and his clan a century ago. William, the young chief, got a local lass with child, but abandoned her and married another, driving the pregnant lass to hang herself. Her mother, after cutting the burn from her daughter's still-warm body, had brought the curse down on the Macquaries and their isle, stabbing the bloody knife into the willow tree where it still seemed to bleed today. No one could budge it nor explain the strange life cycle of the tree, but with each Macquarie brother finding love, the tree had healed from the dead willow it had been before. But the knife wound still bled, streaking the trunk with sap that looked like fresh blood. All eyes rested on Egan, and he jammed his hands through his chin-length hair. "The curse will not be broken by me marrying just anyone." "Aye," Callum said. "Love must be involved." Egan crossed his arms. "I don't think that exists." He looked at his 4 brothers, each glancing at their wives with raised brows. "Not for me, anyway," Egan said. "For the 4 of ye, sure, but I'm independent." From the age of 10, Eagan had decided that he would one day go his own way. I didn't need the same woman warm on my bed for the rest of my life. Beck laughed. You say that like 'tis a bad thing. He wrapped his arms around his wife, Eliza, their son, before her. Vomit true love poetry and advice all you want, Eagan said, but I haven't met a lass interested enough to make me want to talk to her rather than... Eagan, Leah, Drostan's wife, and Lark yelled at the same time. Little ears, Lark said, nodding to the 3 children around the table. Apologies, Eagan murmured and trudged off into the shadows toward one of the bonfires lit to keep away malevolent spirits. Children of all sizes, several of them Macquaries, joined hands to dance around the fire. Just looking at them laughing and dancing with hearty health proved his clan had recovered, and Eagan wasn't about to let his happy family force him into wedding some lass to make the bloody willow tree drop its leaves in the fall. He recognized the slender frame of his elderly Aunt Ida too late. She stood by the bonfire watching the children and turned to him. Eagan, she said, nodding, and reached out to grab his arm. The usual creases in her face and her frown seemed smoother. She almost looked happy. She turned back to the children, but didn't relinquish his arm. They make a lot of noise, but they're fun to watch. The woman, his mother's sister, was old, grumpy, and probably lonely. She isolated herself in his childhood cottage here on Mull. Happy sewing, Eagan said. I'll set a place for your father, and my sister. If you dunna want to, I'm sure Lark will. Ida flapped her free hand at the notion. I always do it. Lark can invite the dead to eat once I'm one of them. The gloaming slowly gave way to night as they stood. Ida's gaze moved up and down him. You look like a lad who's tired of the world. He snorted. I'm tired of my clan and isle and people telling me what to do. He was the bairn of the 5 brothers, and had been told what to do by someone all his life. But now he was a man, larger in stature than all of them, and he'd decided he wanted to be free. He crossed his arms over his chest, bracing his hands in his armpits. I'm on a journey to the mainland. The idea had taken shape into a solid plan over the last year, and his family's suggestions for brides became more forceful. Does Adam know? She asked. He will tomorrow when I tell him. Eagan had supplies and coins to take him to the Northern Isles, where he could live alone for some time before continuing to wherever his feet took him. I want to be left alone. You were a twin in the womb. You've never been alone. She repeated what he'd been told his whole life. But Eagan had never felt a connection with a sister who died at birth. From the time he'd convinced himself that monsters didn't hide in the shadows, he'd fought to be by himself, which was nearly impossible in a home with 4 older brothers who were always tasked with watching out for him. You're part of the Macquarie pack of Wolf Isle, Aunt Ida said, and he heard the smile in her voice. I'll go as a lone wolf, Eagan said, liking the sound of that. No one telling him he had to wed, no lectures about working with a life partner to make things easier, no reminders that he was now responsible for ending the bloody curse. And leave your clan cursed. He inhaled long and full. I'll return someday, or maybe I'll marry someone else, and you'll know it when the willow tree behaves like a tree and the dagger just falls out to the trunk one day. The point was he was tired of people telling him what he must do and when he must do it. Fast footfalls crunched on the broken shells scattered on the path through the village before Aros Castle, and Eagan turned, releasing his aunt's arm. Meg McLean, the McLean chief's daughter, ran toward him, a frantic look on her pale face. Meg? He asked, and recognized that Beck was right. Eagan only felt sisterly affection toward the bonny lass, catching her breath before him. She would never be his second half, as Beck called his wife, someone who fit against him, making him whole. For fuck's sake, Eagan felt whole all by himself, even if he was at one time a twin. Meg tried to catch her breath. Row me over to Wolf Isle. My mother and Aunt Grace. They're having trouble with Cecilia's birth. Meg blinked back tears. I must fetch Griselle to save Cecilia and her bairn. Pardon, Aunt Ida. Eagan grabbed Meg's arm and the two ran toward the dock. Cecilia had always been a prickly thorn, but when she'd found herself pregnant and her beau died before he could wed her, they'd all tried to be kinder toward her. Even Eliza, who'd taken great offence of her interest in Beck. Meg was too frantic for Eagan to stop to tell Adam, so they hurried on. "Grisel may not come. I've never known her to leave Wolf Isle," Eagan said.
"She said she'd help."
They stopped by the ferry that his large family had pulled over, but Meg pointed to a rowboat.
"Take that one."
Out in the slip of water between the isles, Meg's breath finally calmed enough to speak in full sentences.
"Grace said Grisel met with her the last time she visited your isle."
Meg sat facing him, looking forward as Eagan put his shoulders into rowing them easily through the calm water. "She said she'd come to Cecilia's birthing," he asked. "She doesn't even like the woman."
"Grisel said she would help because Cecilia would need it. 'Twas as if she knew the birth would be troublesome."
As Eagan watched the lights from Mull grow distant, he heard Meg gasp softly.
"She's there on the shore. She knows,"
she whispered, passing the sign of the cross before her. A glance over his shoulder showed a figure in white standing at the dock next to the lantern Adam left burning. If the circumstances weren't dire, he'd have asked if it was headless Lady Gwyn with her pig. He pulled the small craft up to the floating wooden dock and tied the boat's rope to iron loops in the wood. "'Tis safe," he said, and felt the boat rock as Meg clambered out. He followed her up the wooden pier.
"Mistress Grisel, did you know I'd come tonight?"
Meg spoke to the hunched form of Grisel, the elderly woman who took in women and children with nowhere else to go. She kept a series of cottages on the south side of the isle. One of her ancestors had cursed the Macquaries and sunk the knife into the willow tree a century ago. "'Tis a dangerous night for those caught between life and death," Grisel said, her voice strong even if her body seemed weak.
"'Tis Cecilia," Meg said. "The bairn will na come. She needs you."
Grisel stared back while two white cats slid along her white petticoat. "I'm not going across."
"My Aunt Grace said you would give aid."
Meg's voice held a note of pleading. Grisel turned to the trees where a second figure in white walked out. The woman seemed to glide down the slope to the bank. Her petticoat, bodice, and shawl were white, giving her a ghost-like appearance. Meg took a step closer to Eagan. The woman stopped by Grisel, and the crone's gnarled fingers caught the woman's arm. "Tessa will go in my place." The woman slid the shawl off her hair, revealing dark, wavy tresses that ended somewhere around her waist. Her face was pale in the darkness, standing out like the white of her clothing. She carried a bag.
"I have cures and knowledge,"
she said, and her voice glided evenly like her walk, graceful and serene. It was almost like a song, and Eagan had the sudden yearning to hear her sing.
"Will you come, mistress?"
Meg inspected Tessa with obvious unease. Grisel was already turning away. "Tessa will take the place of me. I've prepared her." A darkly spotted cat, Sheer, trotted out from the woods to join the two white ones, flitting about the old woman as she walked toward the woods without looking back. Tessa stepped easily into the boat and sat, holding the satchel in her lap as Meg climbed in, followed by Eagan.
"I'm Meg McLean. Thank you for coming to help my friend."
Tessa nodded and looked at Eagan. "I'm Eagan. How long have you been on Wolf Isle?" He hadn't heard anything about a beautiful, dark-haired woman living with Grisel.
1 year.
Had she been hiding? "And your name is Tessa?"
"I am Claudette Tempest Ainsworth, but I'm called Tessa."
Her accent was mixed and melodic. It seemed English on the surface, but with French undertones.
"Hurry,"
Meg said, her fingers curled into the lip of her seat. Eagan used his oar to push off and turn them back the way they'd come. "You're English?" Eagan asked, his arms working hard, bringing the familiar burn of training into his shoulders.
"I'm of Wolf Isle,"
Tessa said, meeting his gaze calmly. The light from Meg's lantern made Tessa's eyelashes seem even longer over her large eyes turned black in the shadows. "Then you must know Gaelic," he said in the language. Staring at him, her lips opened and a string of French came out. He was only able to catch a few words and one sentence. "Je suis français." "You're French?" he said.
"I'm now Scottish,"
she said in English, a calm sternness over her smooth features. Her voice held serene conviction, daring him to contradict what she'd thrown out as absolute truth. He felt his mouth relax. If he had that quality, that inner determination, he'd have walked away from Wolf Isle years ago. Eagan curbed his last stroke through the gently lapping water. The rowboat bumped up to the dock along the edge of Mull. "I'll help you learn some Scots Gaelic," he said.
and a prickle itched along the skin of his back. Hadn't he just told Aunt Ada he was leaving Wolf Isle after tonight? And yet Claudette Tempest Ainsworth, with her fathomless eyes and gracefully retained strength, threatened to push him off course in the time it took to row across the strait. Chapter 2. Tessa kept her eyes forward as they walked along the dark, winding path through the village. Raucous singing ebbed and flowed from the meadow off to the right, where 2 bonfires were lit for Samhain. The Scottish accents sounded harsh to her ears, so different from the flow of French, the sound of her true home. Even after a year of living with the wild wind and sea around her, she didn't belong. She never would. The slicing edge of the coming winter cut along her cheeks with the wind, and she clutched her shawl closed. Tessa's heart thrummed in her chest, a cadence to the music and singing and the light fall of her thin boots on the crushed shells and pebbles making up the road. The young woman who'd introduced herself as Meg McLean talked continuously between sucking in gulps of air. The tethered panic in her voice made Tessa's feet move faster until she felt almost like she was floating. Grissel said it was one of her better qualities, how silently she could move. There was safety in being silent.
"Her waters came this morn, and the bairn is not breaching,"
Meg said.
"Cecilia is strong, but she's growing tired."
Meg broke into a jog to keep up.
"Aunt Grace thought Grissel would come."
"I have all her knowledge," Tessa said, her voice even, "and some of my own." She was no longer an apprentice, not after helping her mother for 20 years before she died. The man who'd rowed them across kept up easily on her other side, remaining slightly ahead to lead the way. Light-coloured hair hung to his even cheekbones, sometimes covering his eyes. His beard was trimmed and neat, and his clothes draped him in the Highland style. Was Cecilia his wife? He was like a dutiful sentry, watching for anything that would slow their hastening. He was tall and broad across the back and shoulders. How he'd rowed proved no padding was needed to fill out his jacket. He was a warrior, not a courtier. He looked at her with intensity on the boat, and she'd met his gaze. Tessa wasn't one to look away first when being pierced by sharp eyes. Her mother had said she reminded her of her father when she stared so intently.
"If you're the father, you may be of use inside the cottage,"
Tessa said. "I'm no relation to Cecilia McLean."
"You aren't a McLean?"
she asked. Candlelight from a few windows splashed dim light onto the dark path. "I'm Eagan Macquarie, and I happen to be available to row Meg across." Her heart quavered. A Macquarie? Eagan Macquarie? Grissel had kept her hidden from the Macquaries for the last year, teaching her in secret about cures and meditations, and how to run the orphanage and women's home. 'Twas as if she was protecting Tessa from them, but Eagan Macquarie didn't look like a monster. Grissel had seen him at the rowboat, but had beckoned Tessa forward anyway. Was the birthing woman and her babe worth letting the Macquaries know Tessa was on their isle? Meg ran ahead, rapping on a door before throwing it open. The loud keening of a woman in labour cracked out into the night. Tessa glanced at Eagan before entering.
"Relation or not, I may need you to lift her, so don't go anywhere."
Lift her? Where? His eyes grew large, as if she expected him to carry the woman all the way to Paris. Mon Dieu.
"Up toward the rafters,"
Tessa said. "I don't think—"
"If I had your strength, I wouldn't ask. Stay here."
Tessa ducked around the door into the dimly lit room. The birthing scene was organised. The windows across the cottage were open, just enough to allow air to move, but the hearth kept the temperature warm. 2 middle-aged women stood on either side of the dark-haired woman on the bed. Sweat and tears wet her pinched face.
"Grissel sent Tessa,"
Meg said, gesturing toward her.
"Tessa Ainsworth, who's been learning from Grissel over the last year." "Good that old crone didn't come," the mother-to-be spat. "I didn't want a witch touching my bairn."
Tessa's brows rose. Witch? Anger rose in her, but she pushed aside her want to defend her benefactress. The babe needed a calm world, and she wouldn't add to the angst swelling in the room. A handsome older woman with a large bosom smiled at her, tilting her head, which held a bun of twisted braids.
"A year? And we haven't met."
"Perhaps witches are keeping my bairn from coming into the world," the straining woman said, her face flushed and splotchy.
"Hush now,"
soothed the woman with the long braid.
"There are no witches about. Tessa has come to help.
The woman looked at Tessa.
I'm Ava McLean, Lady of Arrows Castle. This is my sister, Grace McKinnon.
Ava nodded to Meg.
You've met my daughter, Meg.
Grace walked closer to Tessa, lowering her voice.
Gracel sensed this birth would be difficult and said she would help.
Tessa met Grace's sharp stare.
She is helping by sending me. I know everything she knows, and I apprenticed for 20 years with a midwife in France.
Even though her words were firm, Tessa's stomach tightened. She'd helped her mother and had seen much, but childbirth was dangerous. Both mother and bebe could die even with the best care.
20 years? Grace asked. You barely look 20. I began with my mother when I was 5. I am 8 and 20 now.
Grace blinked and then turned towards Cecilia, her skirts flaring with the force.
Mistress Tessa is a renowned midwife, Cecilia,
she called over the woman's groan.
She'll bring your bairn into this world and keep you in it. Lord, please let it be true.
Tessa walked up to the straining lady, removing her shawl.
I will check your progress and devise a plan to help you labour easier.
The woman didn't answer, which indicated she was weakened. Tessa wanted to help her rest as much as she could between pains. She set her satchel near a table and pulled out her supplies, laying them out in an orderly fashion. Tansy root decoction, 2 knives, string, 3 clean cloths, a tray, and the eagle's stone Gracel had given her. It was a hard nut that rattled when one shook it, but it was known by midwives to ease the pain of childbirth, especially if the woman labouring believed in it. Same with a knife placed under the bed. Tessa took one knife and the eagle's stone to the side of the bed. She held up the knife.
This goes under the bed to cut the pain.
She slid it under the bed, hearing it coming to rest on the wooden floorboards.
And here is the eagle's stone from Africa that Gracel is letting you borrow.
She slid it over Cecilia's head and lowered it to rest on her chest.
It protects the babe and the mother from death.
I've heard of this, Grace said, fingering the stone.
It rattles.
She shook it gently and looked at Cecilia.
Hear it? 'Tis a real eagle's stone. I'll check your progress,
Tessa said, but waited until Cecilia nodded. Tessa slid back the bottom sheet, which was wet with urine and birthing fluids.
We need to change these linens.
Grace hurried to find more in the corner. Tessa looked under for a long moment and came up, keeping her face serene despite the worry coursing through her. The woman's body wasn't opening enough to allow passage.
Rest,
she said, smiling at Cecilia before turning to Ava.
We need a warm bath in here. I want her in it. We must relax the body so it will open further. Plus my herbs.
Ava didn't question her, but strode to the door, throwing it open as if to charge out. Tessa saw Eagan standing there.
Oh, Ava said. Good. We need a bath brought here immediately and buckets of water from the cauldrons up at Aros. There is a large bathing tub there too.
Egan's gaze slid into the room and Tessa felt it connect with hers. Then he turned and jogged off into the darkness. Tessa brought Cecilia the tansy root decoction.
2 spoonsful to strengthen you and your babe, Cecilia.
The tired woman took it down without hesitation. Good. She had hope. It was the most important contribution to a successful birth.
We will have a warm bath for you to soak in.
Tessa spoke evenly when Cecilia shook her head.
Warm water will keep you and the babe clean of this foulness. My herbs will soothe it and help your body open.
It will drown, she said.
No, the babe gets its air from you until I cut the cord that binds you together.
You've seen this done? Grace asked. A birth in water? Tessa nodded.
I assisted my mother 3 times this way.
She looked back at Cecilia.
But 'tis up to the mother, of course.
Bloody fucking hell, Cecilia cursed. I didn't know what to do. Tessa took her hand, which was balled tightly. She stroked the fingers open one by one.
Then trust me.
She looked into Cecilia's eyes. The young woman was terrified.
Soothe her.
Tessa could almost hear her mother's whisper.
Trust me.
And then Tessa began to sing. Her voice flowed out from her middle as if she'd opened an aqueduct, the higher-pitched notes rising and falling with the words of her mother's favourite lullaby about a bird learning to fly. Tessa sang in French, but it wasn't the words that soothed, it was the melody. She closed her eyes, releasing the emotions of worry, hope, and then triumph as the bird joined its mother in a tall oak tree.
Little bird, do not fear the ground. Look upon the sky above and soar toward heaven.
When Tessa sang, she imagined the sound ribboning out of her to swirl about those nearby. She inhaled, taking the air from her lungs and turning it into beauty, like a mosaic or tapestry of colours, orderly but beautifully woven. When the song finished, Tessa opened her eyes to find everyone in the room staring at her. The exhausted woman's face had warmed with colour, and she breathed easier. Meg sat holding Cecilia's hand, but stared at Tessa as if in a trance. Ava spoke first.
"That was," she shook her head, "the most beautiful song I've ever heard. A bird struggling to fly."
Tessa looked at her. "You know French?"
"Oui,"
Ava said, and took a breath.
"You are most talented, Mistress Tessa." "'Twas a song my mother taught me," Tessa nodded to Cecilia. "It calms."
A breeze blew around them, and Tessa looked at the door, which was open. Eagan Macquarie stood there with a large wooden tub sitting on its end. He cleared his throat. "I brought the tub." Had he heard her sing, or was he just shocked to be this close to a birthing woman? Grace draped Cecilia with a clean sheet, and Eagan brought the tub in. Several other men followed. "2 steaming buckets," a brawny man with greying hair said, "and 2 boiled and cooled earlier."
"Good, the water is clean,"
Tessa said, nodding and pointing to a spot near the hearth to set the tub. The man poured his bucket in the tub and walked to Grace, tipping her chin to bring his eyes up to his. "Usually 'tis I who makes ye dumbfounded by my kisses." He leaned in and kissed her mouth. When he backed up, Grace's cheeks were stained red.
"Her song," Grace said. "'Twas mesmerizing."
As the men filed out, they glanced at Tessa, mild suspicion in their eyes. "I'll stay outside in case you need me," Eagan said, and closed the door behind him. The men walked off, along with Keir and Tor, toward the bonfires. Eagan knew he could call on them if more help was needed. "Who is she?" Eagan turned to the shadows next to the house, where he spotted a short, stout man he didn't know. Father Timothy, the travelling priest, stood with him. Were they hiding there? "My midwife," Eagan said, his instincts making his blood rush. "From Wolf Isle." The man wore a cape over a tunic and breeches tucked into tall black boots. His tall rectangular hat sat over hair that fell to his shoulders. He carried a staff. "Her singing mesmerized everyone who walked within hearing," the man said, using his upright staff to indicate a wide circle before the cottage. Eagan glanced at the silent priest and then back at the man. "Who are ye, and what's your business here on Mull?" A cold smile spread over the man's clean-shaven face, giving him a devilish look in the flicker of Father Timothy's lantern. "I am Walter Glebe, and my business is witches." Instant dislike licked up inside Eagan. He'd heard how people on the mainland and all throughout Europe were being judged and executed as witches without proof, except for their confessions under torture. "There are no witches on Mull or Wolf Isle, Master Glebe," Eagan said, and nodded to the priest, "as I'm certain Father Timothy has told ye." "'Tis a fearful business," the young priest said, crossing himself. "The church has asked us to hunt out any heretics worshipping Lucifer, and—" He looked at Eagan with widening eyes. "And to cast curses on good Christian peoples." "Good Christian peoples?" Eagan asked, letting his disregard float on his words. "How about terrible Christian peoples?" He spoke of his ancestor, William Macquarie, who brought the curse onto his clan a century ago. Glebe frowned, the harsh lines of his face more cutting in the flickering light. "'Tis not humorous, lad." The term lad made Eagan's hands ball into fists. As the youngest Macquarie, he'd fought all his life to be seen as older. Now that he was 26 and the tallest of his brothers, the term didn't fit him. "There are witches all over Scotland," Glebe continued, "and I'm paid by the Crown to find and punish them." "I've seen no evidence of witchcraft, Master Glebe," Father Timothy said, which was probably true. He'd rarely come to Wolf Isle, and as far as Eagan knew, he'd never actually seen Grissel, who looked very much like the proverbial witch with her long white hair and gnarled features. Glebe nodded at the cottage, where the faint melody of another song began. "Open your eyes, Father. Witches are walking amongst you. They're especially active tonight, when the veil between the living and dead is thin." "Sown is a night to honour our dead," Eagan said. "The
Sample complete. Ready to continue?